Welcome into the FutureSox Roundup. My name is Elijah Evans, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Jeff Cohen. We are back with our second edition of 2024 on the Roundup here. Last week, we introduced Jeff to the show and kind of got things rolling with some key takeaways from last year's draft class, in addition to some of the players that we really think are going to make a big impact at the Major League level this year. So if you haven't listened to our first episode together, go back and listen to that on YouTube, wherever else you get your podcasts. Today, we've got a fun episode because out of nowhere, the White Sox made two trades on a Saturday, pretty much just back to back within about 5 minutes, I think. I was checking Twitter and I saw the first one break and I was like, whoa. And then next thing you know, there's two trades, one kind of that brought back prospects for a current major leaguer and one that actually sent out a prospect for somebody that hopefully will make an impact at the major league level this year. So before we get into that, first of all, Jeff, how you doing?
Doing good. It was a good week and looking forward to getting into some prospects. And yeah, a lot of news out of Chicago.
Yeah, definitely. It's an exciting time. I think we're gearing up to the season. We're only 3 weeks out from spring training at this point, which is pretty crazy. So now is kind of the time where it's like, what's the roster look like? Where are we at? These are the two. I don't think there's going to be many more big trades. I wouldn't be shocked though. I mean, it seems like Getz is kind of working on just fine tuning and finding the right pieces to plug into this roster and just add a lot of depth. Actually, I think the biggest thing about this offseason has been a lot of veteran depth in a way where the White Sox have competition for roster spots. I think there's 30 to 35 players that are going to have a real shot at making that 26-man roster, possibly even more, honestly. So there's a lot of spots open for grab. And let's dive into these trades because these are interesting and they definitely change the dynamic of the roster because you got three players coming back to the White Sox who are just about major league ready. They're all technically qualified as prospects, but all of them, have either two of them have major league experience and all three of them are at the age and the experience level where they've been in AAA. They have that level of experience and they're kind of ready to potentially make an impact in the near future. So the first trade was Gregory Santos, who was kind of I would say the breakout reliever of the year last year for the White Sox. He stepped up at a young age and showed that he can be a serious high leverage bullpen piece at the major league level. But ultimately, bullpen pieces are the type of piece that you often want to trade when you're in the situation the White Sox are because you can capitalize on their value. 5 years of control for a young relief arm. And in return, the White Sox got not only two players, but also a draft pick for the 2024 draft. So I think that was honestly the biggest get. I think when you really look into it, the biggest get in that trade was the 69th overall pick in the 2024 draft. That's a second round comp pick from Seattle. So that's a pick that, if you look in the past, right, there's some really exciting prospects in the White Sox system that have been, second, third round guys. Like that's not a pick to scoff at, right? I mean, that's going to put the White Sox in a position where they've got three picks in the top 70 and guys they can really, it also adds to the bonus pool. So it gives you more money and more flexibility in the draft. And that's kind of the first takeaway that I saw when I saw that trade was like, oh, that's kind of fun because we saw the Orioles make a trade last week where they traded away the 34th overall pick. And now with the ability, these comp picks that can get traded, it adds a different layer to all these trades where it's basically just X prospect, right? It's the way to think of this trade is almost like two prospects and another one to come because they will be drafting a prospect in 5 months from now that would be a pretty high draft pick at that point. So the 69th pick and then Prelander Baroa and Zach DeLoach, I think that's how you say his name. I'm not 100% sure, but Baroa is an outfielder. Baroa is a relief pitcher and DeLoach is an outfielder. Both are, major league ready. Baroa appeared for Seattle at the major league level last year. He's high stuff. The command is iffy. That's kind of the mold, right? But if you're trading away a high upside reliever in Santos, you're getting back another guy who could be a high upside reliever. He kind of moved into a full-time relief role this past season with Seattle, and he's got the stuff to really stick at a key spot in the bullpen. It's just going to come down to his command. He struggled with walks in the past. He's continued to last year a little bit. That was, he made 2 appearances with Seattle. And that was kind of the continual issue with him has been, can he command his stuff? But it's really exciting stuff. What have you seen online this week about Baroa and what do you like about him, Jeff?
Well, one of my buddies is a Mariners fan, so we've talked a lot about him, and he's been high on him for quite some time. Yeah, the big fastball controls the issue, and we'll see if Brian Bannister can get him squared away, and if he can, it's a huge get for the White Sox.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at trading a reliever, right? Like I was saying, that's kind of the type of player you want to capitalize in. And if Baroa clicks, right, there's a world where he's as good as Gregory Santos, honestly, right? It's not a guarantee. It's far from a guarantee. I think the command is really still an issue. but his stuff is up there, and he's got the stuff to be a quality reliever pretty soon, right? And then you switch it over to Zach DeLoach, who is the White Sox need a right fielder. That's no mystery. We knew that there was still going to be some ads coming in the outfield, especially because Luis Robertson center, Andrew Benintendi's in left, but the right field job and the fourth outfield job, for that matter, are pretty up in the air. There's been some small signings here and there. There's been some minor league contracts, but DeLoach is a guy who's 25 years old, was really, really good all last season. He played it's the PCL, so the most hitter friendly minor league. So it's a little bit hard to gauge, but an 868 OPS last season, 23 home runs at age 20, he's 25 years old, right? He played 138 games in AAA last year. That's kind of all you need to prove for a guy who is continued to hit at every level. And as was last year was the best year of his minor league career. And he's someone who's going to get the chance to earn reps in right field. What have you seen on him, and what is your kind of gauge on how much he could impact the team?
Well, if his floor is that of a fourth outfielder, that's
Right.
just the floor. I'll
Right.
take that in as a add in to a trade where you also get the competitive balance pick and a big relief arm. I'll take
Right.
that. And if you think about it, well, here's a spoiler alert. We're going to also talk about the acquisition of another young guy, Dominic Fletcher. Fletcher and Deloach become the top two White Sox outfield prospects.
Yeah.
So that is not insignificant.
Yeah, I think for a team that doesn't have a lot of depth in the outfield, we've talked about this before. Luis Robert's incredible. He's going to be in center field for a long time. Benintendi's locked up on that contract, but beyond those two, there's really not a lot of exciting depth. I mean, we saw Oscar Colas last year, and he just didn't appear to be a major league caliber player for most of last year. And a team that doesn't have a lot of depth in the farm system. We're going to talk about one guy later who I do like in terms of outfield prospects, but there's not a lot of outfield prospects. A guy like George Walkow, right, is many, many years away. That's probably the top outfield prospect in the org right now. But these are two guys with a high floor. And just something you can bank on. Originally, when I saw this deal, I was a little disappointed in the return because Santos, 5 years of control for a guy who immediately slots into a high leverage role. I was like, dang, I feel like the White Sox could have got a little more. But when you really look at it, at the end of the day, you have an upside reliever who, if he clicks, could be another high leverage reliever, an outfielder with at least a good AAA player with the hope of being, a fourth outfielder, maybe a platoon starter at best, and then a draft pick that, the way the White Sox have been drafting lately could be really valuable. So all in all, I think it was a pretty solid trade. I think Santos wasn't going to help the team right now, given the status of the organization. And you're able to get three pieces that could all be, major league pieces in the future. We'll flip it over. You already mentioned Dominic Fletcher. This trade caught me seriously off guard. The White Sox traded Christian Mena, who was a top 10 system prospect by all pretty much rankings, and a guy who made it to AAA last year at 20 years old, which is something you really don't see often, especially for pitchers. And he's someone who had shown a lot of upside at the mound, and there's been some concerns about his fastball, and that hasn't gone away. But I was a little shocked to see the White Sox trade him. What was your instant reaction to the Mena for Dominic Fletcher trade?
Yeah, it caught me off guard as well. Because as you and I had talked about in our first episode, we need to look at all of these Chris Getz trades with an eye to 2025.
Right.
And so, yeah, in a vacuum, it's a great trade. He becomes the top outfielder in the White Sox minor league system. But how does he fit into the team in 2025? And maybe he's a great fit with his defense, and if he's got a decent, at least a league average or higher on base percentage. But it also gives the White Sox two corner outfielders with minimal power. I've read some takes on him that he's got a little more power than he's got deceptive power. So hopefully that's the case. But
Yeah.
this day and age, you typically want at least one power bat in your corner outfield, right?
Yep. It's definitely a factor. I think the White Sox, when you look at the roster, I think you're banking on Eloy Jimenez as a DH being that power outfielder per se, even though he's not playing the outfield. And obviously Luis Robert is not necessarily a traditional center fielder. He's more of a masher than, a normal center fielder. A lot of guys will think the most athletic, the most fast guy. And while Luis Robert is obviously fast and athletic, he also does have 40 home run power like we saw last year. So that's kind of your power outfielder who's also your athletic center fielder. But it is interesting that you say that, because there is some similarities with Benintendi. With that said, I think Fletcher has a little more intrigue to his game. When you look at his season last year, in AAA, he had a walk rate of 12.5%, which is really nice to see, and a strikeout rate. Pretty much his entire career, he's at a strikeout rate under 20%. So, and then to go along with 10 home runs, right? So in 66 games, you got to see some power at that level, like you said. I mean, there's some sneaky power there. I don't think it's a power bat, but you know, he got called up to the Diamondbacks for small stretches last year, 28 games in the major leagues. The walk rate went down from what it was in AAA, but that's just a very small sample. And he had a 113 WRC plus, an OPS of over. I think in the major leagues when he was playing last year, he had an OPS pushing 800, I want to say. So this is a guy who showed more last year in right field than anybody we've seen playing right field for the White Sox in, I don't know, a number of years for sure. So I don't. The trading Mena feels weird to me and it feels wrong, but at the same time, I think this is a situation where you kind of just got to put some faith in the new guys and Bannister and all these new guys that are in control and just let it happen and see where it plays out, because there's got to be some logic there with Mena where they just don't quite see the fastball coming together and they see him becoming more of a reliever, because I can see the risk there. He's really reliant on his breaking balls, and the breaking balls were really effective last year, but there was times last season, the numbers against the fastball are not great. It got beat up a lot last year. He was kind of working on adjusting it into more of a two-seam fastball as opposed to a four-seam, but in general, it wasn't that effective last season. So I think if the organization sees him as a high reliever risk and they can get a guy who could start opening day probably in right field, it's a chance sometimes you got to take.
Yeah. When I think about the acquisition of Fletcher, I think, yeah, he's a great fit to the team. And it would be even better if they could move Benintendi.
Yeah.
And um, and people think, oh, that contract is an albatross. I don't think so. $15 million a year is not that crazy. And if Benintendi has a good first half of the season, somebody might take a flyer on him for sure.
Yeah, it would be tricky coming off of last year, right? So it'd have to be a much better first half of the season, I think,
Right.
just because of where
Right.
he was last year. But again, I don't disagree. That's definitely a possibility. And I think there's a world where, that happens, and there's a world where they just kind of eat some contract money to get rid of him too. I wouldn't be shocked to see that happen. I mean, I know you never want to just eat contract for the sake of eating contract, but I think it's definitely possible, given where the Sox are at right now. I don't know if Benny's the long-term piece, right? I think there's a lot of concerns of if he should be around long-term, and if he's not, then maybe Fletcher is the perfect right fielder, and you can try and figure out left field in the future, whether it be, a George Walkow eventually, or a free agent signing next year, or a few other pieces that could kind of develop. So it's hard to gauge, but I think in the short term, these trades netted two right fielders who are going to both probably see major league time this year. Fletcher, I think, will be the opening day starter, honestly, based on what we saw from him last year, and given that he's going to be 26 this year. And then Baroa, who will have a chance to earn a bullpen spot right out of the gate, honestly. And if he doesn't right out of the gate, he should be up rather soon, I would say. So there are three pieces that we'll see in Chicago this year, probably, in addition to a draft pick that will be pretty valuable. So all in all, very interesting. I can't say I completely understand this offseason by Getz, but I see the vision. I see the ideas behind it. And I see that, like we've talked about, this year is a building season. It's not about right now. It's about figuring out some pieces, plugging some holes, and just seeing what you've got to work with going into next year while letting all these prospects in the system grow.
Yeah, one last comment before we move forward. When I
Yeah.
think about Fletcher on the roster, I'm thinking how he fits into a roster that maybe has Ramos at third and Montgomery at short, and Vaughn at first, and then plus Eloy and Robert.
Right.
Um, so maybe that works if there's enough power from those infielders.
Right. I think that's a good point. I think there's a world where it makes a lot of sense. And at the end of the day, this team has struggled with contact and with just getting on base. And this is a guy who should get on base at a pretty regular clip. And that is something that it shouldn't be scoffed at. I mean, it can be important at times, and it can make a difference. And fundamental baseball is what Getz has been preaching all offseason. And this is another guy who looks like a fundamentally sound player. He's going to play good defense. I mean, the outfield defense could be phenomenal. And that's coming off of, I mean, all things considered, I know Benintendi had a down year last year, but he's a career solid defender. Luis Roberts, a gold glove candidate, and Fletcher is, from all things I've read, a well above average defender as well in right field. So you're looking at an outfield that will have the best defense the White Sox have had in the outfield in a number of years, given who's been playing the outfield the last few years. So we'll see where things take it, but it was interesting moves. It's fun to see Getz make moves. Moves are good. Moves are exciting, especially given the status of the White Sox. So some things, who knows? There's a chance that Christian Mena develops into a really good pitcher. I wouldn't be surprised. I think he's got incredible work ethic. I enjoyed talking with him this summer, and he's a good pitcher. But they saw something they wanted in Dominic Fletcher, and that's worth taking a shot on sometimes. So we're gonna see how that all plays out. Let's dive into some more stuff because we're talking prospects here. That's what we're all about. All three of those guys might be in the big leagues this year, but our focus today is going to be on guys who are definitely further away, not players we expect to see in the big leagues anytime soon. We're going to talk just some single A and high A guys and where they're at, and some guys we really want to watch this season. The first one is pretty obvious for most people who know the kind of the status of the White Sox farm system. We're going to start on the pitching side, and that's got to start with Noah Schultz, right? Noah Schultz is the consensus second-ranked prospect in the White Sox system pretty much anywhere you go. And he's someone who the upside is unbelievable. He's had Chris Sale comps since the second they drafted him, and he's a 6'9" left-hander. I think he's only 20 years old. So drafted out of high school in the first round in 2022, and the upside is unbelievable. But he only threw 27 innings last year. So I want to hear your take on this because you saw Schultz in person in Kannapolis, and he's someone who, if he can get some innings under his belt and really start to build up his innings, this is a guy who could legitimately be one of the best pitching prospects in all of baseball.
Right. Well, he's got a fastball between 94 and 96. He also has the best slider I saw in the minor leagues last year. Just deadly wipeout. And he was developing a changeup and seemed to be making some progress there. But you're right. It's all about getting innings under his belt. But assuming he does that, Elijah, can you see him getting to Birmingham, or do you think he ends up the year in Winston?
I don't think Birmingham, just because he is really young and because he spent the entire season last year dealing with arm injuries and only throwing 27 innings. I think it's going to be a really slow pace for him, just because this is a guy who, like I was saying, this is a guy who you can envision being at the top of your rotation one day. And those are the players you don't mess around with. You don't want to rush them. You don't want to push their arm. It's just not worth it. And it's not like he's 24 coming off of a season with 27 innings. He's 20 years old. He doesn't even turn 21 until almost the end of the season. So this is someone that we want to see and we're excited to see, but we got to be patient. And fans just have to be patient with this guy because he is extremely talented and he's someone that we think could be a massive piece of the future, but you can't rush that. He's going to start at Canny again, I believe. And I think he's someone who, you start him 3 innings a game and you see what he can do from there. And if you can just keep him pitching once a week, that's the goal, right? It's not about forcing him to get to 6-inning games, right? Keeping him in the rotation is the key thing, right? Last year, 10 starts, 27 innings, right? So he was only going 2-3 innings. I think he maxed out at 3 1/3, I want to say, in his biggest start of the year. So, he wasn't pitching a lot, but if you can get him in the rotation, making 20 starts, 25 starts, that's the dream. Even if it's 3-inning starts, 4-inning starts, right? Getting him that repetition and getting him at least 20 go-arounds in the rotation would be massive for his development. If he gets, I'll put this in on record and in my thoughts, if he gets 75 innings next season, this is a guy who will be one of the top 5 pitching prospects in baseball, if not top 3. The upside is there. Like you said, the fastball slider combo is ridiculous. His changeup has continued to get better. I think every time I've kind of watched him last year, his changeup looked a little bit better. But in general, his combination of his arm slot and his length with that riding fastball and just the sharpness of his slider and the movement it's got on it, it's really special.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Very exciting. And, we're going to talk about some other names. Schultz was at the top of a really impressive rotation in Kannapolis. A lot of other interesting names we're going to get into.
Yeah, 100%. We'll dive right into the next guy who, was drafted with Schultz and is someone that we think highly of. And last year was kind of the year for him just to get innings under his belt. And now I think I'm really ready to see another step from Peyton Pallette. This is a guy who was a second rounder, super high upside stuff when he was in college. And he's just someone who I think last year was his version of this coming season for Schultz. Like I'm saying, he needed innings. He was coming off of surgery. He needed to get those innings under his belt. He ended up throwing 72 innings last year in Kannapolis, and that's exactly what he needed to do last year. It wasn't amazing. The walks were a little higher than you would have liked. The strikeouts weren't quite as high as you would have maybe hoped from a guy like him, but 72 innings, 22 starts, a lot of just repetition, staying in the rotation, getting his innings under his belt. I expect a big jump forward actually from Paulette this year. I think now that he kind of is healthy and he's got that time in the system, he's a guy that I think could really take a big step forward. I think he'll be in Winston sooner than later, and I think he'll probably end up in Birmingham this year, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. 22 starts last year was everything you could hope for him. And, I talked to both Peyton Paulette and Tanner McDougal, both guys coming back from TJ surgery. And, they admit it's a process. You've got to find your release point. You spend half the season trying to, rework your mechanics. So it's a work in progress, but really encouraging.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. He's got the upside, and he now that he's healthy and now that he's got that season under his belt, I think it's time where you could see a jump in his stuff. His fastball is extremely exciting. That was kind of the one of the more exciting factors of him coming out of college, that he had that really high velocity fastball. But in general, it's developed some good movement. He's continuing to work on that curveball, and that changeup is just a well-rounded three pitch mix, I think, and a guy who in general, if those three pitches are working, he could be a really solid starter as he continues to develop. I think he, will be in Winston. I think Birmingham is on the rise for him. He's an older guy. He's been around. He was a college draft pick, and now that he's fully healthy, I think Paulette's really exciting to watch. And you just mentioned the next guy, Tanner McDougal, another guy that came off TJ last year, and it was all about getting those innings. I think that's the biggest thing was getting him on the mound and getting him healthy. I think last year the results for him weren't quite what a lot of people expected from him, because he was a really high draft pick, a fifth round pick, but someone that was out of high school and just more upside than a typical fifth round pick, honestly. And this is only going to be his age 21 season, which I think it's hard to see, because he threw some games in 2021, missed all of 2022 with TJ. And then last year, 21 starts, 69 and a third innings, similar thing, just had to get on the mound, get those innings, 80 strikeouts across those 69 innings. There was a lot to like with McDougal, and he's another one that I think, he's only 20 years old, going to be 21 this season. So another guy we're going to be watching closely. And now that he's fully healthy and had that first season of getting innings under his belt, could be really exciting to watch develop, and probably will make his way to Winston soon.
Yeah, I agree. Really exciting. One of the things that he really impressed with was his breaking pitches. A lot of spin on those breaking pitches.
Yeah, 100%. I think his curveball comes in as a 60 grade, and it's something that could even be better, honestly. His fastball is high velocity. The curveball has some really good, break and just a lot of depth to it, I think, from what I've seen. And I think he's someone who he's kind of continuing to work on what that third pitch is going to be. He's worked with the changeup. He's worked with the slider. I think it's going to be a little bit interesting to see where he kind of attacks with that fastball curveball and how he goes beyond that, because, to be able to be an established starter, you typically need that third pitch to work with. And I think I'm curious to see what that becomes, whether the slider or the changeup becomes that true third pitch. I think he's a guy that will spend the majority of the season at Winston. And like I said, he's still only 21 years old this season. So been in the system for a while, kind of been on the top prospect list for a few years now, but someone that now that he's healthy is going to be exciting. So I'm looking forward to watching him develop. Moving into some of the next pitchers, we've got some fun international guys. How about Juan Corella? Was picked up last season in the Kenyon Middleton trade, which was a really under the radar move of all those deadline moves by the White Sox, kind of selling off some guys. And Middleton was someone who was in the midst of a kind of a career season out of the bullpen for the White Sox, and they cashed in a big way. I think Corella, for a rental reliever, Corella was a really nice pickup, and he's someone that I personally have him ranked a little bit higher than I think the consensus does, because he looked really good at a young age last season. And he was just kind of continued. He started at the lower levels and then just has gotten better and better every season. Honestly, he was solid in 2022 with the Yankees organization. And then last year when he came over to the White Sox, he went straight to Winston-Salem and was really impressive. His first 6 starts with the organization, 6 starts, 32 and a third innings, a 3.34 ERA to go along with 27 strikeouts during that span, and just limited contact well. He's just a really well-rounded arm. Did you get to see him at all in Winston in person?
I did. Yeah, he was really impressive. I was looking at his stats in low A with the Yankees before he came to the White Sox. 109 strikeouts in 83 innings, only 65 hits, and 32 walks, which is not too bad in 16 starts. So,
Yeah.
yeah, very impressive. I
Yeah.
think he was overshadowed by some of the other names, but I don't think he's going to catch anyone off guard this season. I think he'll become one of the best pitchers in Winston.
Yeah, I think he's the type of guy who has a lot of a really safe floor, I think. I don't know if the upside is like he doesn't have a pitch that's really good. He doesn't have stuff that's, overpowering. But I think this is a guy who works all of his pitches pretty well. He's got a 5 pitch mix. From what I was looking at it, he's consistently throwing a fastball, curveball, slider, changeup, and cutter as well. So, he works a lot of different pitches. They're all pretty solid. I think he's got just a good repertoire and a consistent pitcher who, kind of projects as one of those back of the rotation arms. Maybe he's a bullpen arm if things don't work out, but a lot of different pitches to work with. I think he could continue to add some strength to. He's really slender at this point. He's listed at I think he's listed at 185 pounds, 6'3". So pretty lean young guy. And at only 22 years old heading into the season, I think he might even get to Birmingham right off the bat, but I think sooner than later, after starting in Winston last year, he'll be in Double-A, and someone that should be in the rotation, getting starts every single week. And I think the floor is there for him to really take another step forward if he continues to add some strength and some extra movement on his pitches.
Yep. Absolutely. And again, not out of the question. We keep talking about what the White Sox are going to look like in 2025. He could be up at the All Star break.
Whoa, yeah, I don't hate that take. I think there's a
Right.
lot to think. There's a lot to dream on with him. I think this next year will be the first full year with him in the system, and he'll get a chance to be a starter and make 25 starts and just see if he can continue to get better and build off what he did last year. Because what he did last year was quietly one of the better pitchers in the lower levels of the minor leagues for the White Sox once he got traded over. That takes us into another guy, a fun international guy to keep an eye on. Another one is Aldrin Batista. Who is someone who I also think I have ranked a little bit ahead of a lot of the other guys in the system. He, came over to rookie ball. He was playing in the DSL last year, and then this year made 10 appearances in rookie ball, and then finished the season in Kannapolis with 5 starts. Listen to this, Jeff. Last 5 starts, his first 5 starts at affiliated ball, a 2.66 ERA across 23 and 2/3 innings, 21 strikeouts to 7 walks, and only 7 runs allowed across those 5 starts. So this is a guy who, he's super young. He's really raw, only 20 years old, but got up to Kannapolis last year and not only looked comfortable, but looked really dominant. And this wasn't just a guy who, got pushed to Kannapolis to just and struggled and kind of just figured it out. Like he immediately looked good in Kannapolis. So this is someone who, at only 20 years old, I think Batista is one of the more slept on arms in the system, in my opinion, from what I've seen from him. I'm excited to go watch some more of his starts in depth this season, but it's always good to see a guy at that age already start to look good in affiliated ball, especially his first taste of full season minor league ball at the end of the year last year. So Batista's a guy that probably will start again in Kannapolis, but is really exciting under the radar arm at only 20 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Did you get to see any of him at the end of the year in Kannapolis?
Actually, I saw one of his starts, really impressive.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to learn Spanish, and I tried to talk to him in Spanish after the game. We had a brief conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, I think he's a guy that's for those that don't know him, he's probably the least known name of the ones we've talked about so far. Keep your eye on him, Sox fans, because I do believe that he's someone who could really make some waves this coming season. And I don't think he's on many top 30 lists. He's going to be on mine though, personally. And I think he's someone that we could see really take some more steps forward next year. That takes us into kind of a different type of arm. We're going to go a little bit. So we've been talking, Batista's a guy who, you love the upside, you love the projectability. Tyler Schweitzer is someone I want to mention as just somebody who is just a quality pitcher. And as an older player, he's going to be, I believe he's 23 years old going into this season. Schweitzer is someone that's just really well-rounded. He pitched at a small college at Ball State and was someone who, the Sox took a chance on in the 5th round, which is pretty high for someone of his college status. And He's just been nothing but consistent since he last year in his first full season. He was just steady, steady, steady. Split time between Kannapolis and Winston, and I think Schweitzer's just as a 4 pitch mix, just pretty good command, good control all around the board. Just a really well rounded pitcher who I think the floor for him and his age right now, we could see him really move up the rankings pretty quickly. What have you seen from Schweitzer?
Yeah, 13 starts in Kannapolis, 9 in Winston-Salem, and combined 227 batting average against. Yeah, really solid. And I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
of that great Kannapolis staff, I believe he was the first of those starters to move to Winston.
yeah, I think he was one of the earlier ones that went up for sure because he had 9 appearances, he had 9 starts, 10 appearances in Winston down the stretch, and the numbers reduced a little bit in Winston, but generally speaking, he still did a really good job at limiting hard contact. He forces a lot of ground balls just the way he pitches. Again, not a guy that's going to overwhelm you with strikeouts, but 121 strikeouts across 107 innings is nothing to scoff at. But he's just going to command well. He's going to force guys to hit into ground balls and just be a well-rounded pitcher. And that's something that is always good to have in the system. And I think it's going to cause him to be in Birmingham, if not off the bat, pretty soon, I think.
Right. And if he profiles as an SP4, that's great. We'll take that.
Yeah. Exactly. There's nothing you got to have some guys that you can see that reliability with, and I think he showed nothing but consistency last year, where you can pencil him in as a high floor guy who will continue to rise to the system quickly. Let's touch on two probably relievers here. I think Eric Adler is the first one I want to mention because Eric Adler is a guy who was really, really good last year. Not even, I think there was never a chance he was going to be a starter. He's been looked at as a reliever off the bat when he was drafted, but a really high upside reliever. He finished his last 16 games in Winston-Salem, 16 games pitched, 20 innings in that time, a 2.70 ERA, 23 strikeouts. He made his way. He was in the Arizona Fall League, just a guy who has just been nothing but steady. I think, given the fact that he's 23 years old, was drafted 2 years ago, I think he's going to be in Birmingham probably to start the season, honestly, in the Birmingham bullpen. And I think he's going to become kind of a guy that you could look at as a possible closer option. He got 5 saves last year, and someone who could continue to be, a legit piece in the bullpen. What have you seen from Adler?
Well, here's the stat I really like with regard to his 20 innings in Winston-Salem. No home runs.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you
Yeah.
just don't see that from minor league pitchers very much.
No, you
But
really
he's got
don't.
a big fastball. I think it tops out around 98. He's got the potential to have 3+ pitches. So if he can just stay on top of his command, big future.
Yeah, I completely agree with Adler. And then let's touch on Norge Vera quickly before we get into our hitters. Vera's a guy who we haven't been able to see pitch, unfortunately, much. Just a lot of injury issues and things holding him back. And in his time, we saw him in 2023, 2022 for a while, and he looked really good in Kannapolis last year, and then struggled when he got to the higher levels. He got pushed a little bit towards the end of the season. Last year, he dealt with some injuries, got some time in Winston, definitely struggled. The walks have continued to be a huge issue for him, but someone with a big arm that, there was a time when he was regarded in the top 30 prospects for the White Sox. He's probably outside of that right now, but, I think he is a starter. I think he might profile more as a reliever moving forward. Where are you at with Vera, and what do you think we could see from him this year?
I actually caught one of his games, and given how little he pitched, that's something.
Yeah.
But when I saw him warming up, I thought he was soft tossing in the bullpen, just getting loose. And someone said, no, those are his mechanics. It was the smoothest delivery I've seen in the minor leagues. I mean, it just looked effortless. So yeah, if he gets healthy, if he has a healthy season, we'll get to see what that potential really is. We haven't seen it. He's had 2 years just filled with injury.
Yeah, it's tricky for sure, but I think it'd be nice to see Vera get some more innings under his belt. He'll probably start in Winston again, maybe work his way up to Birmingham if he can kind of produce and stay healthy. Moving over to the hitting side, let's keep it rolling. I think the first guy I want to mention is someone that I think most fans at this point are familiar with. I did a great interview with him. He was super fun to talk to, and that's Jacob Burke, who, like we were talking about, there's not a lot of outfielders to watch in the system. This is definitely one of them. Burke had a huge breakout season last year. He was an 11th round pick 2 years ago, kind of fell in the draft. He was originally projected to go much higher, but fell back in the draft. And the Sox were able to scoop him up for an above slot in the 11th round. And last year, he showed the makings of a really, really solid player in his first full season. He split time between Kannapolis and Winston, finished his last 50 games with Winston, was amazing in Kannapolis, a 928 OPS there. Still solid in Winston with a 771 OPS. Solid stolen base threat, really exciting defense. I know you saw him a few times. The defense is spectacular in center field. And then, made his way to the Arizona Fall League this past fall alongside top prospects Brian Ramos and Colson Montgomery, and actually performed better than both of them in the Arizona Fall League for all things considered. I know that's a very small sample size in a kind of high pressure situation, but seeing Burke keep up with prospects that are 2-3 levels above him, he hasn't even been above high A, and he was facing mostly a lot of AA, AAA pitchers, and succeeded in the Arizona Fall League. That was exciting for me. Not a lot of power probably that you're going to see from Burke, but a solid approach, good speed, elite defense, really solid contact skills. That's kind of the makings of what Burke's at. What did you see from him, and what do you think he could kind of be this coming season?
I watched Burke a lot because he, as you recall, he had a 52 game, which is insane, a 52 game on base streak. And so I was watching a lot of those games, especially as he neared Colson Montgomery's record. Um, one of the, he's what, an 11th round draft pick, I
Yeah,
believe, and
exactly.
and so he plays with a chip on his shoulder, right? He wants to
Yep.
prove that he belongs, and he plays really hard. He's one of those guys that you just can't help but like.
Yeah,
Um,
he's a super
yeah,
likable
I'm
player.
anxious to see his upside. So he's performed well through high A and low A, and so curious to see what he does in a full season in Birmingham.
Yeah, I think the question with him is just going to be the impact with the bat. I think he is a little aggressive at the plate sometimes, generally, and kind of is limited with his power, not a ton of power, but he has a line drive swing. He can drive balls to the gaps, and then from there, it's just all about the wheels and the defense, right? I think it really the selling point for him is that he's a well above average, you know, runner and fielder. So I think Burke he kind of has that profile of a fourth outfielder. I think he could be more than that. But I really do think he appears to be at the very least kind of an exciting fourth outfielder to keep an eye on because of that speed and that defense.
Well, one of the things that 52 game on base streak underscores is his ability to get on base. He took a
Yeah.
lot of walks. He had a 377 on base percentage. That's
Right.
great. That'll
Yeah.
play.
Yeah, I think right. It's he's not a typical like, oh, he's got great contact, he's got great power. Neither of those are in his wheelhouse, but he finds a way. He gets on base, he makes things happen on the bases once he's on base, and then he goes around and plays gold glove type defense in center field, which is that's the thing where, he could be a really solid center fielder or an elite corner outfielder, I think, defensively when you look at him in that regard. We'll shift over to a player who is kind of the total opposite in terms of that. We're talking about that floor with Burke being just a really well-rounded player. Let's talk Ryan Burroughs, who's that really high upside. I think one of the guys that we're watching in this system as someone who could really show a lot this season, has yet to appear in affiliated ball, was in the DSL in 2022, and then was in rookie ball last year. His numbers came down a little bit in rookie ball, but this is a guy with plus speed and just a lot to dream on. A really lean, has a lot of room to add strength, solid bat to ball skills, and just someone that I think are kind of circling as that guy that, should start his full season career in Kannapolis this year. And that we just really want to see what he's got because he's looked rather exciting in the Dominican League. And then in rookie ball last year, there's just a lot of young kind of energy from him, and someone that I think we would want to see what he can do. What do you think are some of the things that you noticed about him or you're looking forward to seeing from him in Kannapolis?
Well, he was a fun interview. And I think what's amazing is you're right. He hasn't taken his first pro at bat, and yet he continues to shoot up these prospect rankings.
Yeah.
So his reputation and what he displayed in the DSL was just advanced hitting skills, just really good at recognizing pitches, managing the strike zone, getting the bat on the ball. So yeah,
Yeah.
exciting to dream on him. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think he's someone that we don't know exactly what he's going to present, but I think he's shown enough where you want to see what that next step's going to look like for him, because I think there's a lot to like there, and there's a lot to dream on, as someone who is just 19 years old, will be making his debut in Kannapolis at affiliated ball this year. So really exciting prospect to watch. I think there's not a lot of players in the system that have as much to dream on, as with Burrows. We'll shift over to another guy who is young and is kind of didn't have the best of seasons last year in comparison to the year prior when he really showed out. But it was his first professional full season. So Lloydell Chapei is an interesting name to watch because he was in the DSL in 2022 and then last year immediately put in Winston-Salem. So this is someone who I think it's understated how much the organization kind of put faith in him to jump him in his first professional season to high A immediately, where he played the entire season, 106 games. And the approach is iffy. I think the 115 strikeouts, he can definitely get aggressive at times, but he also had 61 walks, high speed guy, 26 stolen bases, and just a well-rounded player. A lot of doubles as well, kind of gap to gap type stuff. Not a ton of power, but Chapei is someone who I think people forget that last year was his first professional season in stateside, and was still pretty solid, being kind of rushed to a higher level.
Yeah, I think it says a lot that the White Sox thought enough of him to skip
Yeah,
Kannapolis completely.
yeah,
He's an
I agree.
interesting guy. He's 5'8", 187 pounds. That's a
Yeah,
pretty stocky fellow. But yeah, I thought his stats were phenomenal last year. 36 extra base hits, 10 home runs, and like you said, 61 walks. That's a
yeah.
great first season.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. I think it was underrated that I think the expectations might have been a little bit higher for him last year, but like we said, skipping a level, still solid, a lot of upside with the speed, kind of gap to gap type of swing. He can hit the ball all over the place. So that's someone that we want to keep an eye on because I think he is getting a little bit underrated, in this past year, considering this is his first professional season. Let's move into another guy so let's talk about some of these college guys from these recent draft classes. Brooks Baldwin is someone that really caught my eye last year, as just a super versatile player. Baldwin played all over the field. He was just really steady for much of the season. I think it was kind of someone who just continued to produce, in Kannapolis and then moved up to Winston-Salem, where his numbers actually got much better. It's not super common that you see a guy in his first full professional season who gets a promotion and then the numbers jump up. A 783 OPS when he was in Kannapolis jumped to an 870 when he was in Winston-Salem for the final 26 games of his season. Some solid speed, 22 stolen bases. He walks a little. He had 15 home runs, 15 doubles. So he's got some underrated power, and it's always a valuable factor to play all over the field. And Baldwin is someone who played. I want to say he played 6 positions. I'm going to check this right now. But what are your thoughts on Baldwin?
Well, I'm curious, where do you think he profiles position wise?
I think he is a type of player who you want being a Swiss Army knife. I don't think because his power is solid, it's not great. His hit tool is solid, it's not great. I think he's right around average in terms of his hit and his power. So he's the type of player that if you can get decent offensive production out of him, being able to move from all over the infield and even in the corner outfields would be incredibly valuable. I'm looking at it right now. Last season, he played shortstop, DH, first base, second base, third base, left field, and center field. So he
Wow.
basically played everywhere. This is someone who, if you can get decent offensive production out of a player like that, and he can play all over the field, that's a level of versatility that can provide a lot of value to a team.
Well, and so far he's hit everywhere he's been, even if he doesn't have the
Yeah.
reputation. I mean, yeah, I think he hit 347 in college. He led the Cape Cod League in hits.
Yep.
He had nice ratio of walks to strikeouts. A lot of the things you like to look for. So far so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a floor guy, another guy who I don't think has a ton of projectability, but he's a fringe top 30 prospect in the system probably. I think he might be right outside of the top 30 for me right now. But Baldwin is someone that is going to be fun to keep watching because the versatility is exciting and he showed a lot of variety of strengths last year, where he could be he'll be in Winston probably, and I think because of his age he could be in Birmingham pretty much sooner than later. I want
Yeah,
to touch on
and
another guy. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
excuse me. And he's a 12th round draft pick. So
Yeah,
you're just rolling the dice. But if you want to have a successful franchise, you need a couple of those guys to hit.
Completely. And I think it's fun to look at the White Sox. We talked 2023 draft class last year. I'm excited to see where that one goes, but it's cool to look back at the 2022 class because those are guys like half the guys we've just mentioned in the last 20 minutes have been those 2022 draft class, and a lot of the mid to late round picks. Baldwin was a late round pick. Burke was a late round pick. Some of these other guys we've talked about have been, those mid to late round picks, right? So there's a lot of interesting players, and I'm going to get right into another one right now. I want to briefly touch on a few more. We're getting a little long here. I don't want to keep everybody listening to us for too long, but we'll touch on Mario Camilletti, who's another guy that's an 8th round pick from the 2022 class, and that class is looking really good. And Camilletti last year in his first full season was mostly in Kannapolis, got a little taste of Winston-Salem at the end of the year, but finished the season with a 791 OPS, 98 walks. That is something that I took notice of, and only 79 strikeouts. I believe that's one of the highest. I think he was towards the top of the list in all of single A last year in Kannapolis with walks, and just a really well-rounded approach, not a ton of power, but good line drive hitter who has genuinely one of the better approaches I've ever seen from a player at the single A level, a 429 on base percentage last season due to those walks.
Yeah, I find it interesting when I talk to managers and ask about their team. Like when I think I mentioned last week when I talked to Guillermo Quiros in Winston-Salem, the first guy he mentioned was Michael Turner. When I talked to Pat Leland in Kannapolis, he raved about Mario Camilletti.
Yeah. What was some of his thoughts?
Well, he just thought that, he thought he was doing great at the plate and he was solid in the field. He thought he was an all around, well rounded player.
Yeah. You just mentioned him. I was about to talk about Michael Turner. Michael Turner is another guy that I interviewed this past offseason who I love talking to. Same type of thing as Camilletti, like I was just mentioning. Unbelievable approach. 64 walks to only 58 strikeouts, a 430 on base percentage, and he hit too, 309 batting average, right? He's not just an on base guy. Turner had 26 doubles, only 4 home runs. I think he's a big dude. I think he talked to me about how he's trying to add more of those home run balls to his swing because he knows he has that power, but just hasn't been able to translate it into elevation quite yet. I think the launch angle could go up a little bit more for him. He could become a really fun catcher to watch in a system that quietly, like we talked about last week, has a lot of catching depth compared to a year ago. Turner, he is blocked by Edgar Caro. So I think because of that, he probably is just going to be whatever level behind Caro. I think it's kind of like that chain of effects that we were talking about a little bit where Turner will be the level below Caro. And then when Caro gets promoted, Turner will probably get promoted in hand. They're going to want him continuing to get everyday at bats though, because he was truly really, really good last year, playing the entire season as the primary catcher DH combo in Winston-Salem.
Yeah. I'm showing that he's 25. Is that right?
Yeah, he was drafted old. He was drafted at 23 out of college. So he was a 5th-year player in college and out of Arkansas. So he definitely was kind of a senior signing, what you'll call it, in the 9th round, like another 2022 draft guy. That's half of the guys we've talked about today. So he is an older prospect at 25, but someone that it can never hurt to have catching depth in the system, and a guy who has a really good approach at that, and is really advanced as a hitter because of all his experience in college.
Yeah, it's not inconceivable to think a couple of years down the road that it's he and Cuero as the 2 catchers in Chicago.
There's a
That
chance,
could
yeah.
easily happen.
Yeah, even at his age, there's a chance he could feature as a really solid backup catcher. So I'm
Absolutely.
curious to see what happens with him. Well, the last guy we'll touch on, there's plenty of other guys we'll get to throughout the next, then we're going to be talking prospects all season. So if there's other guys you're hoping to hear about today, don't worry about it. Me and Jeff will get to them in the future, I promise you. But we'll wrap with Wes Kath here, who's an interesting guy to talk about because he was a 2nd-round draft pick, someone that had a ton of pedigree coming into his pro career, and it just hasn't quite clicked for him yet. This was his last season was, I believe, his 3rd full professional season. Well, not full, his 2nd full season. He got drafted in 2021. And then, he has struggled to a degree. I think he had a solid 2022. And then last year at his first full season in Winston-Salem, definitely struggled at the plate. The strikeout rate was much higher than you'd like. The walk rate was a lot lower than the season before. And in general, you haven't quite seen his ability and his upside translate into results. But Kath was a high school draft pick, and he's still just turning 21 years old for the majority of this coming season. So I haven't given up on Kath, and I think he's someone who and probably will repeat at Winston to start the year just because he did struggle there a lot last year. But still a big dude with a lot of pop in his bat, and someone that we were really excited about a year ago. And there's not a bad season last year is not a reason to give up on this guy as a player.
Yeah. I talked to Wes, I think in 2022 before his first full season. And then I saw him toward the end of last year, and I didn't recognize him. He was so much bigger and stronger.
Yeah.
He's a second round draft pick. So the White Sox really liked what they saw of him in high school. And so you're right. He's not ready for Birmingham, but hopefully it'll click for him in Winston this year.
Yeah, I think that's someone just to keep an eye on because I don't want to give up on him yet. And I think there's, like you said, there's a lot of strength there and there's a lot of ability there. And we've seen it in the past. It's going to be a new year for him, a new time for him to try and see what he can do. That's all I've got for today. I think we dove into a lot of different guys. We're going to be talking a lot of AA and AAA guys, some of the upper minor guys next week that we're excited to watch this coming season. So that is all for the roundup, Jeff. I appreciate you being here as always, and we look forward to talking to everybody next week.
Great. Thanks, Elijah.